The Magna Carta is one of the most influential political documents in history. It was an important first step in beginning to limit the power of absolute monarchies in England and the rest of Europe. It provided certain protections or rights for nobles living in England. Ideas about rights and protection from the government from the Magna Carta can be found in the U.S. Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. In this video, we will explain how the Magna Carta limited the power of the English monarchy and influenced the U.S. Declaration of Independence and the American Revolution. You may not realize that democracy has not always existed for all people in all places. After the fall of the Roman Empire, feudalism emerged in Europe. Society organized itself in this system so that people would be protected from danger. Powerful lords emerged as leaders and were at the top of society. You may refer to these powerful lords as kings or queens. We can also describe these powerful kings and queens as absolute monarchs. When you hear the word absolute in this sense, think of total power or complete control. When you hear the word monarch, think of a head of state or a king. When we combine those two words and make absolute monarch, we have a king or queen that has total power. Absolute monarchies were governments with kings or queens that had total power. There is a saying that absolute power corrupts absolutely. This means that when people have total power, they become corrupt. Rulers in absolute monarchies had power that was unlimited. There were no checks and balances to make sure one group or one person became too powerful. Because there were no checks and balances, the kings in absolute monarchies mostly ruled for their benefit. This often led to great suffering for the majority of people living in their kingdom. The Magna Carta would be an attempt to limit or restrict the power of King John of England in 1215. The Magna Carta and constitutional monarchies were an important step in the march toward democracy. A constitutional monarchy emerged in England with the signing of the Magna Carta. I'll say that again. A constitutional monarchy emerged in England with the signing of the Magna Carta. A constitutional monarchy is a government where the head of state is still a monarch, which is a king or queen, but that monarch or king or queen has their power limited by a constitution. The constitution puts limits or restrictions on the power of the monarch. This is an important step towards democracy because power is divided so that one person or group doesn't get too much power. The colonists in America wrote the Declaration of Independence and started the American Revolution to protest the abuse of power by King George III of England. They believed he had too much power. The colonists would use ideas from the Magna Carta in writing the Declaration of Independence. A democracy is probably the form of government that you are most familiar with. A democracy is a government where the people make decisions. People participate in democracies by voting and representing each other. Democracies limit individuals and even different groups from becoming too powerful. The government must listen to the people or they will not be reelected. the government's power is restricted because there is usually a system of checks and balances and rules that limit power. The Magna Carta began to restrict or limit the power of the King of England. The Magna Carta, also known as the Great Charter, was signed by King John of England in 1215. The Magna Carta was an important step in limiting the power of the king in England. It listed rights that the king could not deny the nobility within England. It is important to understand that although this granted protections and rights to the nobles in England, these rights did not extend to the peasants. Most people living within England were peasants and therefore did not share these protections or rights that the nobles enjoyed. The Magna Carta influenced the Declaration of Independence because many of the rights or protections that were promised in the Magna Carta were arguments used against the king by the colonists. Parliament is the law-making body of England today. Parliament has evolved throughout English history. It evolved from the necessity of the king to get support for his policies. Throughout English history, Parliament and the king have made agreements involving the power of the monarchy. One of the biggest arguments of the colonists during the American Revolution is that the king and Parliament was governing without them, without their representation. No taxation without representation was the battle cry of the Revolution. The Magna Carta listed rights that protected English nobility from the power of the monarch. First, it is important to understand that these rights and protections created by the Magna Carta were not extended to the whole society. Nobles were the group that benefited the most from the Magna Carta. It limited the power that the English monarchy had. Limiting the king's power translated into more political freedom for the nobility because it guaranteed that the king could not deny certain rights or take certain actions against them. Habeas corpus was one of the most important rights in the Magna Carta. Habeas corpus prevents the government from holding a person in jail indefinitely, that means for however long they wanted, without a reason. Listing this as a right requires the government to inform a person who is jailed as to why they are being jailed. This helps to prevent someone from being jailed for no reason or without breaking a law. Due process is the next right listed in the Magna Carta. Due process creates a legal procedure that must be followed when people are accused of a crime. This might include being informed of the crime committed, being charged with the crime, a grand jury deciding whether there's enough evidence for a trial, and then finally a trial with the judge and a jury. Due process was a major argument of the colonists during the American Revolution, and it can also be found in the U.S. Constitution. The next major right or protection is that everybody had to obey the laws. This would include both the king, the nobility, and all the peasants. There was a long history in England of kings and nobles not following laws and not being punished because of who they were. Another major right from the Magna Carta is the right to own property. Nobles were guaranteed the right to own property and not have their property taken without the right process. Petitioning the king was yet another major right protected by the Magna Carta. Petitioning was an important right because it allowed the nobles to oppose the king without unfair punishment. They could not be thrown in jail for their opposition. The colonists during the American Revolution included this in their complaints in the Declaration of Independence. Not quartering troops in peacetime was the last major right from the Magna Carta. Nobles would not have to house soldiers when they were not in war. This was another major complaint the colonists had against the British leading up to the Revolutionary War, and this is also included in the Declaration of Independence. The Magna Carta influenced the Declaration of Independence and the American Revolution. The Magna Carta limited the power of the government and looked to protect the rights of the nobles. The Declaration of Independence and American Revolution reflected these ideas. The Declaration of Independence argues that King George is too powerful, and the purpose of government is to protect rights, not take them away. One of the specific rights listed in the Declaration of Independence is the right to property, which is included in the Magna Carta. The idea of habeas corpus from the Magna Carta is protected under the U.S. Constitution today and was one of the biggest complaints during the Revolutionary War. Great Britain was using admiralty courts and taking property from the colonists. The idea that all people need to follow laws is included in the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson wrote, "All men are created equal." One interpretation of this is that in the eyes of the law, everyone should be treated equal and everybody should have the same rights. The last major influence is that citizens shouldn't quarter or house soldiers during peacetime. Colonists were angry because they were being forced to house soldiers. They saw this as an attempt for Britain to spy on them and a denial of rights that they should have. They specifically listed this in the Declaration of Independence. The Magna Carta was an early attempt to limit or restrict the power of the government. Ideas from the Magna Carta influenced the U.S. Declaration of Independence and American Revolution. These ideas can still be found today in the U.S. Constitution.